Dobry day, my friends. I'm Jack Mandeville, and this is Jacked History. When I was a 23-year-old freshman in college, I met a professor who provided a disproportionate amount of Russian history and culture courses. And since I had already drank and partied myself stupid in the Marine Corps, I was one of those students who bucked the traditional college experience of binge drinking and hooking up, so I dove headfirst into my schoolwork.
Back to school, back to school.
Russian history was one of those things I latched onto. Sergei Eisenstein's The Battleship Potemkin was a groundbreaking early Soviet-era silent film that not only changed the game of cinema, but covered one of the more interesting topics during the later fall of Russia's Romanov dynasty. But aside from being one of the greatest films ever made, the subject it covered was instrumental in the direction of Russian history. It was the summer of 1905 in the Black Sea. Russia was in the last 6 months of its wildly unpopular Russo-Japanese War. To give context, Japan was a rising economic and military power in the East. The Meiji Restoration, which had begun around 40 years prior, was a concerted effort by Imperial Japan to phase out their old isolationist feudal systems and enter the world stage in trade and modern military might. To put it simply, goodbye samurai with swords on horseback, hello rifles, tanks, and battleships. And their closest neighbors that could meet them as equals militarily was the vast Russian Empire. Hey, if you have cool new toys, you're gonna want to play with them eventually. The new upstarts in Japan were fully engaged in conflict with the aging Romanov dynasty in a battle for control of the East. Enter the Russian battleship Potemkin. Named after Russian naval hero Grigory Potemkin, this pre-dreadnought class battleship had been launched just 5 years prior and was still going through testing and trials in the midst of Russia's costly war with Japan. Two major things were going on in the summer of 1905. We covered the February and October revolutions of 1917 briefly in episode 1. These saw the final nails in the coffin for Nicholas II of Russia and the execution of his entire family.
And the children, too.
Along with the rise of Vladimir Lenin and the Soviets. But the first real revolution the Russian Empire faced was during the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, as Russia was in economic chaos. To put it simply, the people were sick and tired of Nicholas II's bullshit. Ongoing worker strikes and peasant revolts had trickled into the military as Russia was in absolute chaos. The second major thing that happened was the Russian Navy's defeat at the Battle of Tsushima, which kind of sounds like a cool sushi dish. But it wasn't that. It was an utter loss of 21 ships and the capture of 5 ships, with over 11,000 sailors dead or captured in the disastrous naval fight against Japan. It would be safe to say that morale couldn't have gotten any lower. A month later, the Potemkin was doing gunnery training near Ukraine in the Black Sea. Please note that the ongoing war had Russia's most experienced officers shipped out to the Pacific to fight in the war, so the Potemkin was left with a pretty green officer corps. Then everything began to unravel, and it all started with food.
You're playing with us, Peter. You're doing it, Peter.
Let's break it down day by day. The crew of the Potemkin was resupplied with food on June 26, 1905. Yay, food! The ship's doctor, Dr. Sergei Smirnov, inspected it and gave it the thumbs up. On June 27th, borscht was on the menu. The only problem was that there was clearly maggots crawling all over the meat. The crew saw it and immediately told Dr. Smirnov, who proceeded to gaslight them about it not being a big deal. So then the enlisted men proclaimed that they were refusing to eat the meat.
We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Upon hearing about this, the ship's second-in-command, Ippolit Gelyarovsky, who was known as a strict disciplinarian that would often physically assault sailors under his command, went to the ship's captain, Evgeny Golikov, and said, and I quote, "We have to teach them a lesson." From there, Captain Golikov, who wasn't a fan of Gelyarovsky himself, assembled the crew members who were refusing to eat the maggoty food. This is about when all hell broke loose. With the crew assembled, Gelyarovsky ordered the men to get in line and eat the food, but only 12 came forward, leaving Gelyarovsky to demand another sailor take down the names of those left who refused to eat, and heavily implied he was going to execute them using the ship's marines. Everyone scattered from there. 2 of the ringleaders, Grigory Vakulinchuk and Afanasy Matashenko, broke into the weapons room and armed themselves, while others kind of just stood around in shock as things unraveled. The thing about Vakulinchuk was that he wasn't just a run-of-the-mill pissed-off sailor. He had been consuming revolutionary literature for months and was primed to make a statement on that ship. Gilyarovsky was having none of it. He grabbed a rifle from a reluctant Marine and charged at Vakulinchuk with another officer. Well, old Val got a shot off at the other officer and killed him, but not before Gilyarovsky, god damn, I'm fucking this up. Gilyarovsky shot Val in the chest. As Val was trying to wrestle Gilyarovsky's rifle away, he was shot in the back and killed.
There was a firefight!
At this point, Gilyarovsky was trying to rally the Marines to fire on the now armed sailors, but they were having none of it themselves. Eventually, Val's fellow mutineer, Matashenko, got some shots off at Gilyarovsky, which killed him and another officer. In the aftermath, 7 officers were killed, including Gilyarovsky, Captain Golikov, who probably shouldn't have listened to Gilyarovsky to begin with, and Dr. Smirnov. Moreover, the ship was now in control of the enlisted mutineers. The sailors did the honorable thing and dumped Gilyarovsky's body off the side of the ship, and it wasn't found until 2 months later in a bloated state. Gilyarovsky. Grill your ass Oski. Grill your ass Oski. Gilyarovsky. You know what? He's going to be the face of grillyourassoff.com, Peter. Gilyarovsky. You know what? He's going to be the face of grillyourassoff.com, Peter. Oh, hey, what's up? That was an ad read. It was an accidental ad read, but it was an ad read nonetheless. I get my money for that. I get my money for that, okay, Grill Your Ass Off? All right, use code JACKEDHISTORY at grillyourassoff.com. You'll get 20% off of your order, and you know what? It's the best seasoning, east and west of the Mississippi, south of Canada, north of Mexico. I love you. Now that the enlisted were running the show, they set their sights on neighboring torpedo boat, the Ishmael. Many of the surviving officers of the Potemkin mutiny had swam to the Ishmael, but right as the Ishmael was about to take off, the Potemkin was firing on them with rifles and their main guns. So now that crew ended up surrendering, and officers were captured, and the Ishmael enlisted crew joined the mutiny. In that same day, 25 sailors organized a committee to run the battleship, led by Matashenko. By 10 p.m., they were arriving in the port of Odessa, where the city was engulfed in revolutionary riots. As morning came on the 28th, the Potemkin was sitting off the coast of Odessa and ended up capturing a military transport ship named the Veka that was unaware of the mutiny, which just so happened to have Gilyarovsky's wife and daughter on it. Don't worry, they released them without any harm, but I'm sure it was an awkward conversation for the Potemkin crew to let them know that they killed their husband and father and dumped him off the side of the ship. On June 29th, members of the Potemkin and Ishmael went ashore to hold a funeral for Vakulinchuk. What started as a funeral became a political rally, and the Cossack army was sent in to take down the mutineers. They, of course, hightailed back on board the ship and fired some shots into the city for good measure. Okay, so now it's June 30th. 2 squadrons of 5 ships were dispatched to deal with the Potemkin. But the revolutionary spirit was running so deep within Russia's Black Sea fleet at this point that the other ships' sailors refused orders to engage the Potemkin. One of those ships temporarily mutinied themselves and joined the Potemkin and the Ishmael. On July 1st, the crews of the Potemkin and Ishmael decided to head to the Romanian port of Constanta to resupply, but they were refused entry by the Romanians. So then they hightailed it back to Russian territory in Crimea, but were again refused help on July 5th. On July 6th, while attempting to forage coal, the sailors were ambushed and 22 of the 30 sailors involved were either killed or captured. July 7th came and the Potemkin and Ishmael were back in Constanta. And though the Ishmael decided to break off and turn themselves in, the crew of the Potemkin accepted the terms of the Romanians and surrendered the ship, though they intentionally sunk it before the Romanians could do anything with it. Russia, of course, came to get their ship back, and it was towed back to harbor where it arrived on July 14th. The remaining mutineers all lived the rest of their lives in exile, including Matashenko, who spent time all over Europe and even the United States.
I go to America!
It was in Western Europe that he met Vladimir Lenin, who would go on to finalize the Russian Revolution 12 years later, though there's no evidence Matashenko shared Lenin's communist ideals. He was probably just pissed off at the way he and others were being treated, a socialist at best. He attempted to re-enter Russia under a false name in 1907, where he was captured by the police, tried, and executed. Regardless, years later, as the Soviets seized control of the country, Lenin used Matashenko and other crew members' names as inspiration in the Second Russian Revolution. And it was soon after that Sergei Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin was released. Though it was a Soviet propaganda film, it revolutionized filmmaking techniques like the montage and its use of violence that had never been seen in theaters before. Additionally, the Odessa steppe scene remains one of the most iconic and parodied scenes in movie history. So, what's the moral of the story? I don't know. Don't feed the enlisted people maggots, I guess?
Maggots, Michael. You're eating maggots. How do they taste?
Okay, one more thing. I read the comments. I respond to as many as I can. I did see one comment. It's right here. If you want to take a little read while I'm talking to you right now. This should have offended me. It didn't offend me. I actually took it to heart. I listened. So, Dave, for the thumbnail for this video, can you Photoshop me with a top hat and a monocle on my eye just to make me look a little more distinguished? Thank you, Dave. And thank you, Mr. Commenter Man. Please like, subscribe, share, and tell your friends about the show if you feel so inclined.
Mutiny on the Black Sea with a battleship Potemkin. Pissed off Russian sailors on the battleship Potemkin. They won't eat maggots, they're on the ship's bow. Just look at them, I'm the captain now. The waters of the Black Sea are pretty and glistening. No more maggots to give them dysentery. You learned about it here on Jack's History.